Hello and welcome to another exercise. We have now moved on to ArrayList, and in this exercise 10.2, I'll walk you through some of the typical collections methods involved to solving these types of problems. It says to write a method swapPairs that switches the order of the values in an ArrayList of strings in a pairwise fashion. Your method should switch the order of the first two values, then switch the order of the next two, switch the order of the next two, and so on. For example, if the list initially stores these values, 4, score, and 7 years ago, your method should switch the first pair, 4, score, the second pair, and 7, and the third pair, years ago, to yield this list. Score, 4, 7, and ago years. So what happened was we see that the first pair, 4, score, was swapped, and then the next pair involved are just the next two elements. The next pair of elements, and 7 turns to 7, and the last pair years ago turns into ago years. And if you're wondering what happens if there's an odd number of values, then in this example we have to be or not to be Hamlet. So those are 7 elements, that's an odd number. It would again switch any combination of pairs of values, but the final value Hamlet would not be touched. So we find the first pair of values is B2, 2b, that turns to b2. The next pair is or not, that turns to not or. To be, which would be the last pair, turns to b2, and then Hamlet is left alone because there's nothing for it to swap. So first things first, we declare a method. It's not returning anything, it's not asking us to return a new array list. And the name of it is swapPairs. It takes in ArrayList of strings, and we're just going to name that list. Okay. So now that we have our list and our parameter, we have to loop through it. But it's not the conventional way of looping from start to finish like we usually would. I'm going to declare the beginning element to be the first, because we need a starting point and there's no reason to go beyond the first element in this problem. So we're going to start with the first one. And we have to decide how we're going to terminate the loop. So the next condition is the termination, or until what point should we reach that we decide the loop is no longer needed. And that's going to be when I is less than or equal to list.size minus 2. And what this means is we're not going to get any index out of bounds exceptions if we're going to, and I'll explain this as well. We're going to increment I by 2 because we're trying to find each pair of values. So in combination, when we start from the first element, that's 0. And after we find the next element, and I'll explain how to do that later, we go from 0 to 2. That's the next start of the pair. We do whatever, and then the next element is at 4. And then after that, the next element is at 6. So this is a condition to make sure that we don't go beyond the elements. If we're going to find as many pairs as possible within an array list, we have to make sure we terminate at the maximum size, but minus 2. If that doesn't make sense, please write a comment and I'll go into further detail at the end of this problem to make sure that I can explain it as thoroughly as possible. So what we're going to do on the outside, because this is a swapping problem, or swapping values, I'm going to declare a string object named swap, and I'm just going to set it equal to empty quotations. And in here, this is where the collections methods comes into play. So first, I'm going to set swap, and this is at the first element. We're beginning to find our next pair, or our pair. I'm going to set swap equal to the value in the second element, so that would be the first one. So that would be list.get I plus 1. So this get method returns the value of whatever element you put in the parentheses. In this case, I want the element one step beyond the element that's being executed. So in this case, the first one, this one would be the second element. Okay, now that we have that swap variable equal to that, Then we're going to set that second element, the one that we just retrieved data from, we're going to set that equal to the first one. And this is by using the set method. So we say set, and in this case it takes in two parameters. The first one is the element that we want to change or update. In this case it's I plus 1. And we're going to set that equal to the value of the first element. So we use the get method for that. And we have to replace the first element's value with the second element, and that's what we do here. We set the value of the first element equal to swap. We have to make sure to keep swap there because that stores the value of the second element. Because what we're doing with the second element is setting that equal to the first element. So if there wasn't a swap variable, then we would just have two elements with the same value. Okay. And after that's done, looks like we don't need to do anything further. Let's hit submit. Let's see if that works. Okay. I want to pay close attention to the for loop conditional statement here. We start at the beginning element. It's less than or equal to list.size, which is the max value, minus 2. And this is to ensure that we don't go beyond the element. If we try to go beyond the element, then we'll get an index out of bound exception. If we're going to increment the value of I by 2 each time we make an iteration, this prevents any possibility of going beyond the array's maximum value. Now that's out of the way, I want to direct our attention to the swap variable here. We set a variable to a string object named swap, initially set to empty quotation marks. And when we begin the for loop, we set that variable equal to the value on the second element. And what that does is ensure security in that data's value. After we set that equal to the second element, then we set the second element equal to the value of the first one. And now after that's done, the second element's value has been updated to the value of the first element. And the last thing to do is update the value of the first element. And this is only possible by setting it equal to the value of swap. If we try to set it equal to the value of list.get I plus 1, then it would simply have the same value as it. We don't want same values. We want variables to be swapped. If they start off with the same value, then they'll remain the same value. But in this case, we want to swap them. And these are just some test cases that the website provides us. So 4 and 7 years ago, just like before, the first two are found. It's swapped to score 4, and 7 is swapped with 7, and years ago swapped with ago years. So the important things to remember is to ensure security in our for loop, because we don't want to go beyond the element, beyond the array list size. We would get an exception error, and that's not good. The other is understanding how the mini swap algorithm works. And once again, I encourage you guys to try this out on your own. And if you have any questions regarding the methods I used or approach I used for this problem, please leave a comment and I'll address it as soon as I can. Have a good Friday, everybody.